All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into our Worker Wednesday about knowing your rights if you have been arrested recently or have any other criminal history information out there. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're just going to give folks a little bit of time to get onto the live since we are starting at 12:05 instead of noon. So we're just going to give folks a little bit more time to get onto this live. Right now, we see the numbers are growing. We have about 3 people viewing. Marnie, I see you while I'm looking through my Facebook, so thanks so much for getting on. Um, Before we get started on this topic, we just want to share that CLS is open and we are taking new cases. So if you're someone who has a legal problem that we can help with, you can dial our number, which is 215-981-3700, or you can visit our website, www.clsvilla.org, where you can access our information. And also, still just call in. If you do call in and you have an employment issue in particular, you just hit 7, state your employment issue, and you should be forwarded through to our unit. But again, thank you all for joining this call, and we're so happy to be here talking with you today. I think we have some good numbers up. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today for Worker Wednesday, for taking this afternoon to speak with us. Before I get into the topic of our conversation, I just wanted to take some time to note the social time and climate we are living in. You can look through your news feed or watch the news or read articles, and all you see is a nation hurting from in response to the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and countless other Black women, men, and children. Rest in peace to Tamir Rice and Ayanna Jones. We just see a lot of people responding to their hurt to that. And we're seeing people in cities across the nation protest and demand justice. There's been large scale protests going on for the past 2 weeks with no sign of dying down until justice is served, until people see the structural changes that are needed in regards to police reform. People are really getting out there and making their voices heard. And that's kind of why we want to talk to you all today, because we want to think about uh, the aftermath for when people come into criminal justice contact while they're out there exercising their voices and making themselves heard. Um, I want to also introduce myself to you all. So my name is Tracy. I'm a Equal Justice Works Fellow and staff attorney in the Employment Unit at Community Legal Services, where I work with people to help clear up their juvenile and adult criminal records. And I work with Jamie in this unit. She does similar work, the same work. So thank you for having us both. With that, we are attorneys at CLS. We're not criminal defense lawyers. So we can't advise people on open criminal matters. For that, we tell people to go to the Defenders Association. We're here to talk about the collateral consequences of criminal justice contact, but we can't, actually talk about criminal matters. I do want to note that if you are someone who was arrested while protesting, please contact either the Defenders Association or the collective of brilliant community-oriented lawyers who are servicing people who are arrested while protesting. They're with Up Against the Law. And Marnie, I see that you are watching. So if you want to share any information about what you all are doing, please do so. I know that'll be helpful information that people will want to access if they are in that situation. So one scenario I want to give is that if you are someone who was out, you were protesting, and while you were doing that, you were, you know, approached by the police and arrested, taken down to the station and booked and kept there, but then they decided to release you. And no charges were pressed against you. I want to note that if you are in that situation, that arrest data is still out there. I wanted to share that. So when a person is arrested, they're fingerprinted, or sometimes their pictures may be taken. I think what was it that I found that there's a state law that requires arresting officers to ensure that fingerprints and photographs are taken of all persons who are arrested by that officer for a felony, a misdemeanor, or a summary offense, which becomes a misdemeanor on a second arrest after the conviction of that summary offense. And within 48 hours of that arrest, that information has to be sent to the Pennsylvania State Police, where it's collected, and it is kept there. So you may think that that everything is okay, but that information is still there. And certain background checks and reports still pulls from that information, like FBI background checks, for instance. And so you still want to take steps to make sure that that information can be deleted. So something that we do at Community Legal Services we submit petitions that allows us to erase that arrest data. We get the information that we need and we submit those petitions so that won't still show up for folks. So if you are someone who you were arrested, but you were released and no charges were filed, still make sure you are taking the necessary steps to get that criminal history information deleted, because you never know what you want to do in your future and it may still pop up. Now, as an employment advocacy point, employers cannot use arrest data to take adverse employment actions against you. So Philadelphia and state law says that they can only consider actual convictions. So not arrest data or arrests that did not lead to convictions. It's important to note that. But we do know that in practice, that does not happen. And so you can come to CLS if you're in that situation for employment advocacy, so we can help clear that up. Or we know that sometimes the information is not recorded properly. So, it'll still look like it's an open case when it isn't. And so, you can come to us for help with that too. Again, our number is 215-981-3700. And you press 7 and you can get through to the employment unit. Now, if you're in a different scenario where you were arrested and charges were filed, but maybe the district attorney office decide that they don't want to prosecute, or those amazing lawyers from Up Against the Law get your case thrown out. That's great. But at the same time, you want to make sure that the criminal history information, all right, so you still have that arrest data, but now you also have the charges that have been electronically submitted to CPCMS, the court's website, where that information is public and can be viewed and can be shared. That's still out there. So you want to work with CLS or make sure that you file an expungement petition to have those non-convictions, is what we call them, when the case has been withdrawn, dismissed, null prost, to have those non-convictions expunged. Because while it's not a conviction, we understand that there's still a stigma around having a criminal record, and folks can read records the wrong way or just look at the charges and not the disposition. So you still want to make sure that you're taking care of that information. And again, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania law states that, only convictions in a certain type can be considered, not arrests that did not lead into conviction. So as an employment advocacy point, we want you to note that. And the laws I'm talking about is the Philadelphia Fair Chance Hiring Law and Section 9125 of the Criminal History Record Information Act. Right. So I also want to talk to you guys about what happens if, you are arrested, you are charged, you are convicted. The options look different based on what the conviction is. So if it's a summary offense for disorderly conduct or anything like that, summary in Pennsylvania, summaries can be expunged after 5 years, assuming you have no other, you remain arrest and prosecution free. The summaries can, and Jamie's going to talk to you more about summaries, but that's what you should know for that. If you have, if you're convicted of a misdemeanor, for low level and even certain high level misdemeanors, that can take 10 years to be able to get that sealed. And if it's assuming that you don't have any other further misdemeanor or felony conviction within those 10 years, and you pay off the fines and costs. And if you have a felony, that requires a pardon. So that's just a kind of 30-foot view of what those options are, depending on what convictions you have. But it's important to think about the employment advocacy around that, right? So our Philadelphia Fair Chance hiring law states that you cannot be asked about your criminal history on the job application or during the interview. A conditional offer of employment must first be made to you. And then that's when the employer can go and look at the criminal record. And they can only look at things that happened within the last 7 years. And once they get past that point, that's when they have to do an individualized assessment, right? Look at the nature of the offense, look at how long ago it occurred, look at character references, look at rehabilitation, look at suitability for the job. Take into account all of these factors, and they can only deny you if they deem you an unacceptable risk. And once they deny you, they have to give you the opportunity to be heard about that. They have to give you the reason and allow you to kind of rebut that within 10 days. Now, that's important to note, right? Because if you're arrested, if you are arrested in the middle of these protests, right? There's a way that you could talk about that. One, a lot of people are, Keir, the chief defender of the Defenders Association, noted that it's kind of weird for, unusual for people to be brought up on charges during these protests, because it's one person in a swath of other people, out and about. How are we actually accurately identifying people and what they've done when it's just so hard to understand who's who? So that could lead to people being caught up in things, and depending on what you were doing, right? There's a different way that there's an underlining story there, right? That may not mean that you're deemed an unacceptable risk to do certain work because you were just out protesting. You weren't being a danger to another person or to property. Or, you were just someone caught up in the mix of other people doing things. Be sure to explain your underlining story and advocate for yourself so that you're not being defined as a conviction on a docket sheet, is basically my point. So that you can be assessed as an individual, as who you are, which is what that law was meant to capture, to create measures of fairness and justice. So that's my point with that. Same for section 9125, right? We want to do an individualized assessment of who people are. So I want to note that in response to people who are being arrested in association with protests. But I also want to note that there are people who are being convicted of pretty serious charges. So charges like arson or burglary, aggravated assault. These things can be barring offenses for certain fields and industries. And if you are someone with that type of conviction, you want to think through, come to CLS so we can talk to you about, what your actual limitations are. Because even though the Philadelphia ordinance says what it says, if there's a state law that trumps that based on the type of conviction, we want to consider that also. So that's just an overview of, the type of scenarios that you might be in, what the record clearing options are, and the employment advocacy things that we want to point out. But all in all, If you're in any of these situations or know someone in any of these situations, CLS is happy to be of support. And you could call our number 215-981-3700 and press 7. And now Jamie's going to talk to you more. So here you go, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Tracy, and I'm glad to be with everyone today. I'm going to talk a little bit about two categories of offenses that are generally thought of as being less serious or more minor, but can actually have really serious consequences for folks. And those are summary citations and juvenile expungements. So first to talk, and juvenile records, I'm sorry. So first to talk about summary records. There are two different types of summary type situations people might find themselves in. One is where they're issued what's called a civil citation or a CVN. And there's another, which is a summary citation that's actually still a criminal record. And so it's really important to understand which one of those scenarios you're in. From what we've been hearing from folks in terms of what's been issued at protests, it seems like more civil citations are being handed out. So that's good for a couple of reasons we'll talk about, but it's very possible people are also still getting summary citations that are criminal records. And it's also possible, like Tracy was alluding to before, that you might be charged with multiple charges, including things like aggravated assault or simple assault, and you might ultimately decide to take a plea deal to something that's a summary offense like disorderly conduct. So there are a few different ways you might end up in a situation where you do have a summary citation or conviction on your record. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we jump into that, let me just say that for the civil citations, the CVNs, if you were issued a civil citation, it's a fine. But it does not create a criminal record. So none of the sort of employment consequences that people normally think about from having a criminal record would apply. They're not things that get reported on commercial background checks or are found in the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts database or are found in the state police central repository. So in that way, if you were issued a civil citation, you have a lot more protection from having to worry about that getting out or affecting jobs or housing or school or things like that. But if you were issued a summary criminal citation, those are usually for things like disorderly conduct, harassment, loitering, obstruction of highways, things of that nature. That could come up in the context of protests or just in other contexts. Those are tricky because they're often communicated to folks as if they're really no big deal, just the equivalent of a traffic ticket, just pay this fine and plead guilty, and it's just like a traffic offense. And unfortunately, what we see at CLS is that it's not quite so simple. A lot of people who are convicted of those summary offenses do end up facing employment consequences for them, even if they shouldn't. We'll just give one example. Is we have a few clients right now who have summary convictions who haven't been able to drive for Lyft because Lyft is refusing to let them drive based on summary conviction data. And while we think that's illegal, that's the position that Lyft's taking. And so we want to make sure people know that there can be consequences like that to having a summary conviction on your record. And so when you're part of the challenge, when you're given a summary citation, is often you're not fingerprinted or arrested. You're just handed a piece of paper or you're mailed a citation later. And often the notice makes it sound like if you just pay this fine and send in the money, that'll take care of the issue. So a lot of people do that not knowing that they have rights or that that's going to create a criminal record. If you do decide that you don't want to just pay the fine and plead guilty right away, before the pandemic, you would go into a court room and there'd be a process where you'd be given a number of different options for how to resolve your summary. You're not usually given a lawyer in these cases because they're considered minor. And so people are kind of left to navigate the system on their own. And when you go to court, they really pressure people to either just plead guilty and pay the fine, or to enter something that's called the summary diversion program. And the summary diversion program sounds good on paper. It's that you pay $200 and go to a class. And if you complete everything, then your record can be expunged within 6 months. But, a lot of folks can't afford to pay that $200. That can be a really big barrier for people. And also, if your summary citation wasn't justified, if you should have never been issued it to begin with, they don't really kind of encourage you to exercise your right to fight that citation. And if you do fight it and you're ultimately convicted, you're almost certainly still going to be issued a fine. It's a slightly higher fine than if you had pled guilty up front, but you're not in such a drastically different situation. So we can't advise people about what the best option is for them. Like Tracy said, we're not criminal lawyers, but we just want people to know that they do have rights in these cases. There are consequences to having a summary conviction. And as Tracy said earlier, the only way to get them expunged is to pay all those fines and costs on the conviction and to go a 5-year period without having any further arrests. So not even convictions. If you're arrested again within 5 years, it can disrupt your ability to get that summary expunged. And as we've, all know and have seen, it's not always possible to prevent yourself from getting arrested. So, that might be an issue for people. So we just kind of want people to know that. But if you do have a summary conviction on your record, we also want you to know that you have rights in the employment context as well. Under the law that Tracy referenced, the Criminal History Records Information Act, Section 9125, it says that only misdemeanor and felony convictions can be used by Pennsylvania employers when they're hiring people. And so since summary convictions are not misdemeanor or felony convictions, they should not be considered by Pennsylvania employers in the hiring process. So if you're denied a job because of a summary conviction, you have rights under state law. In addition, our Philadelphia Fair Chance hiring law that Tracy was mentioning, again, requires an individualized assessment. If you have a conviction from the past 7 years, employers have to look at what kind of risk it poses. And with summaries, because they're supposedly so minor, we always argue that they shouldn't be something that employers should be considering. So if you do have a summary conviction, or you do end up deciding that pleading guilty to a summary is perhaps your best option, which is a decision you would make with your lawyer, just know that you do have employment rights, and eventually you would have expungement rights as well if you weren't arrested again within that 5-year period. The other issue I just wanted to briefly touch upon is juvenile family court system involvement. We've been hearing from news reports and from folks on the ground that a lot of young people are getting caught up in these arrests, protests, and young people as young as 15. So depending on what's happening and what the charges are, young people in Pennsylvania can sometimes be charged in adult court, even if they're under 18, depending on the nature of the charges. But also there's a separate juvenile and family court system where young people might be charged. And so if you're in the adult system, all the same rules that Tracy kind of went over earlier about arrest and conviction records would apply. But if you're in family court, then there are different rules about how those records can be viewed and how they can be considered. So the first thing to know is that juvenile court records are generally kept much more private or confidential than adult court records. They're not available for free online on the court's website the way adult records are. And the only time they can be released on an employment background check from the state police is if it was a serious felony and the young person was over 14 years old and they were adjudicated on that felony. So there's a limited subset of juvenile records that can be released by the state police for employment background checks. So that's important to know. But even if juvenile records are released on those background checks, there are still protections for them to not be able to be considered. So again, under that state law 9125, it talks about misdemeanor and felony convictions being used against people. And adjudications for juvenile cases are not convictions. The Juvenile Act makes very clear that juvenile adjudications are not convictions and should not carry any of the normal civil consequences of convictions, because the whole point of the juvenile court system is supposed to be that it's not a punitive system, even though we know it often functions that way. It's not supposed to be a punitive system. It's supposed to be one based on allowing young people to, move forward with their lives. And so juvenile adjudications of any kind, even if they are released on a background check, should not be considered under state law. And under our Philly Fair hiring law, it was actually amended about a year ago to explicitly state that no juvenile record of any kind can be considered in Philadelphia by Philadelphia employers. So just know that even if you are adjudicated on a juvenile offense of any kind, and even if you can't get it expunged for the reasons I'll talk about in a minute, employers are not allowed to use juvenile records against you. And if you are denied a job because of a juvenile record, please come see us so we can advocate for you. And then I'll just note that in terms of expunging juvenile records, The rules, the state law rules about juvenile expungements are that you can get your adjudication expunged after 5 years from the time you finish your court supervision if you don't have any subsequent misdemeanor or felony convictions or adjudications on your record. There is an exception to that. You can get it done earlier, even if you do have an adult record, if the district attorney's office agrees. So often we're able to work with the district attorney's office to get them to agree to expunge records before the 5-year period, or even if somebody does have an adult record. So if you do have any kind of juvenile record, again, come in and see us and we'll see if we're able to get it expunged for you. The last thing I'll note is sometimes adult charges are brought in adult court against young people, but then they're sent back to juvenile court or decertified. Oftentimes people think, well, it was sent back to juvenile court, so I only have a juvenile court record, and so I don't have to worry about the adult court system. But unfortunately, those types of cases do create sort of an imprint in the adult court system because that's where the charges were originally brought. Those charges will still come up in the adult system, and often they look kind of like what Tracy was saying earlier. They look like open cases that were never resolved. So we've seen a fair amount of young people who come to us with background checks from commercial vendors or who have been denied jobs because the employer says you have an open case for robbery on your record that was never resolved. And in reality, that case was sent back to family court and has all the protections of a juvenile record under the law, but those charges are still showing up in the adult system. So if that's a situation anyone's been in or knows somebody who's been in, we can get those adult records expunged so that people aren't in that situation anymore. And then we can also look at whether the juvenile record can be expunged. So again, the kind of takeaway is if you've been arrested, especially if it was in the juvenile system, we probably can help you get it expunged now and you have rights. If you have other types of adult conviction records, you might still have employment rights. But if your charges were dropped, you definitely want to look into getting an expungement. And I'll just say again, so Tracy had mentioned our intake line, 215-981-3700. When you first call in, I just wanted to know you have to press 2 before you press 7. It's kind of a long phone tree to get to our different units. So either you can listen to the whole thing and follow the prompts, but if you want to kind of shortcut it, just make sure you press 2 and then 7, and you'll be directed automatically to our employment unit box where you can leave us a message and somebody will get back to you to talk to you about your case. So if any of those situations we've described apply to you, or if you're facing employment challenges because of a record, definitely feel free to give us a call so we can give you more individualized information and advice about your situation. So with that, I will stop talking. And if we should have said at the beginning, if folks have questions about anything we're talking about, feel free, there should be a chat that you can put that into on Facebook. Feel free to ask questions or comments and we'll be able to answer them either live now or we can try to get back to you. So we'll just give folks a few minutes if they want to write in questions.
Yeah. Also, Marnie Snyder, who's an attorney with Up Against the Law, wrote a message in the chat, but just in case people can't see it, I don't know, you may not be able to see it, I'll just read it. She says, "Hi there, this is Marnie Snyder. I am a volunteer lawyer who is a part of the First Amendment Defense Coalition. We are partnered with Up Against the Law, with the Up Against the Law Legal Collective. We're volunteering to represent you if one of the following happened to you. So 1, if you were arrested for a summary, felony, or misdemeanor during or related to a protest. 2, if you were a victim of police brutality, whether you were arrested or not, and if you received a civil citation." Marnie, how can people, do you have a link or a number or anything that people can use to contact you all? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who, thank you for sharing that message, but if you have any contact information to share, feel free. Betsy Lopez, I see you asked about how you can get in contact, and Charlene let you know that you can get in contact with you calling us at 215-981-3700. Julie Dunlap said, "Great presentation about your important work. Thank you so much for this very lovely comment and for watching." We see a lot of our community partners and friends from, partnering organizations watching. Thank you all for watching. And we're just going to stay on the line if we have any more questions. I know Marnie said she has a link to share that she's going to share soon.
I'll just note that CLS's website also has a lot of information that we covered today. In case you don't remember everything we talked about, you can visit clsphila.org. There's a ton of fact sheets and information there about employment rights with a record. We have one publication that kind of goes through all of the different fields that people might be looking to get into, you know, everything from nursing to cosmetology, to ride sharing jobs, to healthcare jobs. So if you do have some kind of conviction record and you're concerned it could impact your ability to work in a specific field, or if you're being brought up on charges that you're concerned could interfere with your line of work that you're already in, check out that resource on our website. Let me see if I can quickly pull up a link to it, and then I can put it in the chat. But that resource is a really great starting point to try to figure out how certain types of convictions could affect your job. But like Tracy said, you know, we're always happy to kind of work that through with people and figure out what your options are.
I also want to share that this live is being recorded and it will still be up on our Facebook website even after we're done. And I was like reading that it said like starting from around June 1st of 2020, there were about 429 arrests in Philadelphia. That's a lot of people, and that's not even including the people who were arrested on 676 or following that. The protests in Philly have been going on for probably 2 weeks. So there's a lot of people who could really benefit from this information. So if you would like to share this video after it's done from CLS's website, just to make sure it's getting out to the people who need it, who will be most, who, you know, would benefit from knowing this information or coming to CLS, please feel free to share and spread the message wide, because that's why we wanted to do it, to make sure folks knew about this information. Actually, that's funny. Nina Miles Lane, you hit me with a question as I was answering it. Yes, this will be a recording that you can share, and please feel free to share it. We thank you for that.
So I just realized the link to the publication I was referencing is currently broken on our website. So now that I know that, we'll make sure to fix that. So just be sure again to check out clsphila.org. If you go to the employment section of our website, you can see there's just a ton of information in general about the impact of criminal records and how to clear them up. But we'll make sure that publication gets updated on our website too. Sorry, I couldn't put it into the chat right this moment, but we'll make sure it's up there. So definitely feel free to check out our website for more information.
And thank you, Marnie, for putting in up against the laws information. So if you're someone who falls within those 3 categories that Marnie outlined, you can visit upagainstthelaw.org, where they have different forms and information for people. And for assistance, you can email upagainstthelaw.lc@riseup.net. So that's their information for people who are seeking representation and they, you know, qualify for that. Not seeing any other comments right now. But again, thank you all for watching, and please do share this video, this recording, so other folks can also access this information. I guess we can hang on for one more minute in case we get any other questions. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have, thank you to Marnie for the work that you're doing. It looks like we don't have any other questions. So with that, we say goodbye to you all. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you for future Worker Wednesdays. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.